Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. In the wake of the Durham investigation disclosures last week, we discussed Hillary Clinton responding. Every time Trump gets into more trouble, the wilder the charges and conspiracy theories about me seem to get. So now his accountants have fired him, and the investigation draws closer to him. And right on cue, the noise machine gets turned up. Fox leads the charge with accusations against me, counting on their audience to fall for it again. As an aside, they're getting awfully close to actual malice. Ooh!
Do I smell a lawsuit?
Threatening a defamation suit.
Oh.
Testy.
That would be great. Love to have her deposed.
That's not Fox doing anything other than reporting
right.
what the Durham investigation, the Durham investigators, Durham,
Right, but she has
disclosed to a court of law. Yeah. But I know that Durham is over the target. You know how I know?
How do you know?
Because Michael Tomasky, writing in the New Republic, said it's time for John Durham to shut down his sham investigation. That's how I know. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by Andy McCarthy, former Chief Assistant U.S. Attorney in Manhattan, also contributing editor at National Review, and the author of the bestseller Ball of Collusion. Andy, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Great to be with you.
Careful now with what you say next, because Hillary Clinton is throwing around the phrase actual malice.
Ooh.
Well,
look.
Yeah.
30 years is the same nonsense.
What about the calls now, like I mentioned from Tomasky at the New Republic, and the sham investigation all of a sudden, because the sham investigation, or this investigation won't go away, so now it's time to smear it as a sham and hope they can pressure the Biden administration to do something that Merrick Garland doesn't want to do?
No, I don't know. Durham has brought one case so far, and the guy pled guilty. So now I didn't think I would like to have seen him be a little bit tougher in that case, but I don't see where, the prosecutor's been very careful about what he's done. He's been very measured. Unlike a lot of investigations, while this has gone on for many years, we're not getting a steady stream of leaks coming out of the prosecutor's office. Mm-hmm. He's gone about his business. He's brought one case, and the guy pled guilty. So, to call it a sham doesn't really make much sense given what the record is. And I think your instinct on this is right. He's obviously not only brought these other cases, but if you read the narratives in the indictments that he's brought, they make sense based on everything we now know in the way not just of Durham's investigation, but also reporting and investigations by the Justice Department's Inspector General. We know that the likelihood is that the Hillary Clinton campaign developed, ginned up, and peddled this Trump-Russia narrative that seized the country and deranged us for 3 years. And it looks like Durham has nailed that part of it. Now, whether he'll actually get convictions on these false statements cases, we'll have to see. I think the case against Sussman is a tough case, especially because there's really only one witness to the alleged false statement. But the overarching narrative certainly seems to match up with everything we know, which is that this was a political hit job.
Well, when did Hillary Clinton, do you think that she was in on this?
I don't think there's any question she was in on it. I think her campaign is the one that developed it. Mm-hmm. Mark Elias, who was the Clinton campaign's lawyer at Perkins Coie, was meeting. It was Perkins Coie, the law firm that retained not only
Steele,
the guy that we heard about in this case. They got the information from this guy Jaffe, who brought it to Sussman to bring it to the FBI and the CIA. But they also brought in Fusion GPS, which brought in Steele, which brought in Danchenko, who's the other guy that Durham has indicted. So they choreographed this thing, And Clinton herself was tweeting about it during the campaign. And it was a big deal to them, not only to develop a narrative that Trump was a clandestine agent of Russia, but importantly, from their perspective, they wanted to be able to tell the media that that the concerns about Trump were so grave that the government agencies were investigating it.
And Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor now, also, and it was a senior advisor of the Clinton campaign, also tweeting about that. So they cook this up, they peddle it. It's all senior level people, and it just strains the bounds of credulity to believe that Hillary Clinton had no knowledge of what was going on at the upper reaches of her campaign with something so sensitive.
She's the only reason that they have a campaign.
Right.
Everything they do is they're doing for her. And the one thing we know about her over the years is she's a control freak. The idea that, these guys were all free agents and they were acting without her knowing about it.
Well, I know that there's attorney-client privilege, but if you're trying to plot a crime, could we get in on that information and on those conversations?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Amy. There's what's known as the crime fraud exception to attorney-client privilege. So if the communications are not for the purpose of seeking legal advice, but actually for the purpose of, carrying out a criminal or fraudulent scheme, there's no attorney-client privilege for that.
And speaking of straining the bounds of credulity, so they cook this up and they peddle it to the FBI and CIA. How could ostensibly sophisticated law enforcement and intelligence agencies fall for this if they were not predisposed to fall for it? In other words, if they weren't in on it as well.
Well, see, now here's the problem for, I think, those of us who have thought that the Obama administration and its agencies were more complicit in this than victims of it. And I think this is what Durham must have been struggling with. Yes, they brought the Alpha Bank conspiracy to the FBI. This is when Sussman meets with the FBI's general counsel on September, 19th of 2016. It's this Alpha Bank suggestion that he brings to him, that Trump and Putin are using Alpha Bank as a back channel for communications, and they have all this internet traffic records that shows that. But what we now know is the FBI took the case and investigated it, but within 3 weeks, they had decided there was nothing to it, and they even leaked 10 days before, it was actually 8 days before, because it was Halloween, 8 days before the election. The Times runs a big story that says the FBI has investigated this to the ground and sees no collusion between Trump and Russia. So, I think part of what Durham is struggling with is the Bureau seems very erratic here. And my theory of this, Dan, has always been, and I wrote about this in the book, I thought the FBI's efforts against Trump were stepped-up efforts after he won the election. But I thought that I continue to think that everybody was so sure Hillary was going to win the election that they put this stuff out thinking this was just tying up loose ends. And as soon as she won the election, we were never going to hear another word about Trump or Russia ever again. They just miscalculated.
But I think erratic is the right word. But so they dispatch with the Alpha Bank investigation, but yet they pick up the Steele dossier and run with that.
Yeah, well, I mean, here's what they would say about the Steele dossier. And I'm not saying this is compelling. I'm just telling you this is what their argument would be. I think we would say that not only did they pick up the Steele dossier actually they brought to the FISA court in October, and they continued that investigation for, what was it, about 7 or 8 months into Trump's first year in office. I think what they would say is that they investigated Page because he was a former campaign official, and he was the one that they were investigating, not really the Trump campaign. Now, I don't buy that because I think what they were hoping to get when they started the investigation was his back-stored communications that would have gone back to the time that he was in Russia, which they thought was going to be the mother lode. And then I think after after Trump won the election, they used that investigation as part of what they thought was putting guardrails around an out-of-control president. That's the way they looked at Trump, and they thought they were doing their patriotic duty to rein in something they thought was someone they thought was unfit, and that's their story.
Well, Trump was paranoid, but now we know for a good reason. What do you know about tapping into the servers at the White House, of a sitting president?
Yeah, so here's what I think happened with that. All this blowback that they said, these records are from 2014 to 17. They're Obama administration records, so how could they be, trying to weave a story about Trump and a narrative of Russian spying based on Obama records? But what they don't tell you is two things. Number one, the records go 3 weeks into Trump's time in office. So he was president during part of those records. When Sussman went to the CIA, it was in February. It was Trump's 20th day in office, and what we understand is that the records had been updated. And reporting about this in the New York Times before this whole thing was an issue, and nobody thought there was a Durham motion that needed to be shot down. The Times was blithely reporting that this was, Trump's cell phone use that they were investigating around, in the vicinity of the White House. So there was no doubt that some of these records were about Trump's phone usage. And the second thing is, Durham wants these records to be from 2014 to 2017 because by looking at the records from Obama's time in office, what he's able to show is that what Sussman was claiming was suspicious activity by Trump actually wasn't suspicious at all, that it matched the call patterns that had been in place for years. So Durham had very good reason to highlight, the records from Obama's time in office, but naturally, because, the left had to have a narrative to run with, that's what they ran with. But Durham had very good reasons for filing what he filed.
If Sussman doesn't implicate anybody higher up, is this going to be a case where lying to the FBI is not acceptable, but if the FBI lies to the American people, that is acceptable, and we're unlikely to see criminal charges against any higher ups of the campaign going all the way to Hillary?
Yeah, I do think that people are rightly disturbed by the double standard of how lies by the FBI versus lies to the FBI are treated. And from Sussman's perspective, a situation where Sussman gets charged based on a one-on-one interview with the general counsel of the FBI, where there's no transcript, there's no digital recording of it, and it's one guy's recollection against the other, and they bring that case, yet they don't bring the case against Andrew McCabe,
right,
who is alleged by the Justice Department Inspector General to have lied on 4 occasions, including under oath. So I think people are quite right to look at that and scratch their head and say, how does McCabe get away with it and other people don't? I also think, Dan, going back over these scandals, political scandals since Watergate, Iran-Contra and the Clinton scandals and, Hillary's emails and all this stuff, if you go through the history of that, the narrative that the scandal arises in and the potential for abuse of government power is always much more significant than the charges that get brought in these investigations, which tend to be very minor. They tend to be, process crimes and obstruction of justice and that sort of stuff. So, I understand people's frustrations with that. I feel it myself. But at the same time, for something to be a Watergate level offense, it's got to be the government abusing government powers for political purposes. And so far, Durham's theory seems to be that the FBI was duped. I'm having a hard time with that, just like a lot of people are, but that's his theory. And I think, assessing Durham, you can't cherry pick what he's doing. You can't say, aha, he's caught them doing X, Y, and Z, and then say, but he must be completely wrong about the FBI. I think you have to sort of, take it for what it is.
Mm. He is Andy McCarthy, former Chief Assistant U.S. Attorney in Manhattan, a contributing editor to National Review, and best-selling author of Ball of Collusion. Andy, thanks as always for your elucidation. We appreciate it.
You guys have a great week.
Thanks, you too. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
You're listening to Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
This is attorney Stephen Leahy. This isn't the first crisis we faced together. Back in '08, business professionals in trouble sought help from bankruptcy attorneys.